You always want to go into every pickleball game with fresh knowledge so you have things to work on, and more importantly, you win. Make sure to understand these 5 tips because one of them could be the difference between a win and a loss next time you play. Our first tip of the day is a fun one, and it's that you should try using the shake and bake play every once in a while. So let me show you an example of how that looks, and then I'll explain how you can use it. So the way that this play works is when you're the serving team off of the return, so when your opponent hits the return, one player will choose to drive, okay? So Drew in that last example was the player that drove the ball. And while he was setting up for that drive, I creeped in. And because I creeped in, Nathan wanted to hit to the player that was still back. So I anticipated that, crossed over, and killed that volley. So that's how the shake and bake play works. The player that's not hitting the third shot drive creeps in and poaches to crush the opponent's volley. So here's an example of what that looks like on the other side. And obviously in those examples, we only have 3 people playing because our budget's not super high, but just pretend that there's 2 people on the other side. One thing I'll say is that this isn't just some trick play that only works once every blue moon. You can actually use this play a few times every game and it'll probably work for you. A lot of people comment on my videos whenever I talk about the shake and bake and say this is something that only works at a 3.0 level. But I assure you, if you watch pros play, they do this a lot and it works pretty well for them. That said, this isn't something you want to do every point. This is probably something you pull out 2-3 times a game max. If you do it too often, it's going to become predictable. I'm going to go over how often you should use attacking plays later in the video, so stay tuned. So our next tip has to do with working the point and moving the ball around. I see so many players who are in a point and they're just expecting an easy shot to randomly arise, and when it doesn't arise, they go for a big shot at the wrong time and they get themselves killed. So what you need to know is that during every point in pickleball, guys, you need to be working the point and moving the ball around, okay? You're not gonna just be hitting the ball right to your opponent and then suddenly get an easy shot. Maybe if they're not a very good player, but if you're playing someone that's high level, you need to force them to make a slight mistake that gives you the easier shot. So the way that you do that's by moving the ball around. So to show you an example of what that looks like when dinking, I'm never just hitting to the same spot every single time, right? Hitting into the kitchen isn't good enough. Dinks are actually pretty easy shots to get back. I want to be moving the ball around like this, trying to get him on his back foot so that I can get an easier, higher ball to accelerate on. And I missed that one, but you know what I'm talking about. And when he's back, I don't want to go right at him because even if I go hard, he'll be able to hit a drop and move forward, right? At a higher level, good players can do that pretty much every time. So what you want to do is find open slots in the court that you can use to keep your opponent off balance and they can't move forward, which looks something like this. All right, so I'm going right at his feet, trying to keep it out to his sides, so he's always having to lunge and he can't get that easy drop footwork. And guys, I'm only playing down the line right now with Drew, but obviously in a normal game, you're playing against 2 players. So when you're playing 2 players, you'll almost always be able to find a bigger opening in the court, right? So if both Drew and his partner are crowding towards this side, maybe that opening is over here, right? Or it could be the opposite. The key is that you're always aware, right? And you're using your peripheral vision when you're hitting the ball to find out where the best spot is and where the biggest openings are. So our next tip, guys, goes back to what I was saying about the shake and bake, and it's that you should never go for the same attacking play more than 2 times in a row. So when it comes to something like the shake and bake, it can obviously work very well, but it's more of a surprise attack. So if you do the shake and bake very frequently, your opponents are really gonna start to lock in on how they can counter it, right? And that applies to a dinking situation too. So if I'm dinking, and I start to use my speed up down the line, right? And I win the point with it, right to Drew's backhand. And then let's say 3 points later, I do the same exact thing again and it works. So I'm dinking 3 points later and I go for this exact same speed up down the line and I catch him again. Well, the next time that I speed the ball up, Drew's gonna be sitting on that shot because he's pretty sure that I'm probably gonna go there again. So when you're in these sorts of situations and you're going for these attacking plays, you wanna make sure that you're rotating between different successful plays. You never wanna be using the same play over and over again, right? And it's totally fine if you have something that you like to do really frequently, but you need to make sure that you're not going too often. So let's say early in the game, you use the shake and bake twice in a row successfully. You don't wanna go for it again But what you can do is later in that game, you can pull it out if it's a big point or you really need to win. And the same goes for any other type of attacking play that's proven to be successful. And guys, if you've ever been confused with which player should cover the middle and which player should go for more aggressive shots, whether that be the right or the left player, stay tuned because we're covering that later. So our next tip, guys, you've probably heard that you should always try to target your opponent's weaknesses. Well, that's true, but what if your opponent doesn't have any weaknesses? Well, on the flip side, you can take that same ideology and try to avoid your opponent's strengths, right? So every player has one thing that they're really good at, right? So when you're playing that player, you want to try to avoid letting them use that to their advantage. So let's say you're playing Drew, and every time you speed the ball up at him, you notice that he has really good counterattacks. It seems like he cancels you every time that you go hard. How you can react to this is maybe you become the player that's forcing him to be the one to speed up first. Also, you could simply try to attack more at his partner if they seem like they don't have as good of counterattacks. So by being more patient, I can actually force Drew to be the one to speed up, and maybe he doesn't actually have that good of speed ups, and it makes it a lot easier for me to win these kitchen battles. Or maybe Drew has a really good forehand drive that he likes to use to come in and use the shake and bake or the crash play. How I can counter that is simply by trying to hit my volleys more to his backhand. Maybe his backhand's not as good, right? And if I'm hitting my return and he loves running around it, it could be better off just hitting to his partner, right? Because you don't want to be going into a losing strategy, right? Some people, like I said, are really good at certain things, so you don't want to play into that. Our next tip is that in a pickleball game, you want to play your role and you don't want to be a ball hog. Looking at another sport like basketball, there's tons of examples of really great players that were considered role players who have a very defined role and duty on their team that's to serve their team's maximum benefit. A couple examples are Steve Kerr on the Chicago Bulls or Draymond Green on the Golden State Warriors. A pickleball example of this is Colin Johns and Ben Johns. So Ben Johns is one of the best players in the world, probably the best player of all time. And he's very good at being aggressive and attacking when out the kitchen. So what Colin does is he usually plays the right side and he becomes the more passive player, and he uses a lot of resets in order to set up his brother Ben to be aggressive. So you've probably heard that the forehand should generally be the player to cover the middle. And when we're both righties, right, so me and Drew are both righties, that means that I'm on the left side, so my forehand is going to be in the middle. So when you're on the left side, generally, you're gonna need to be the one that's aggressive and covering the middle. So it might seem like you're being a ball hog if you don't understand this strategy, but this is just what makes the most sense for your team to have the most success. So generally, when a ball is hit in the middle, one of the two players needs to be aggressive, right? And go for it. I'm sure you've been playing a game at some point and the ball gets hit down the middle and you both just look at each other and maybe you're mad, like, oh, that was your ball. It's always gonna be this guy's ball on the left side that's covering the middle. So you need to be the ball hog when you're over here. If you're on the right side, just know that your duty is not to be a ball hog, and you might have to tell yourself to be a little bit more passive about those middle shots so you don't get in your partner's way. Sometimes though, you might be playing with someone that's on this side and they don't really have this ideology. They don't know that they need to be the one covering the middle. So maybe in that case, you actually do need to be the one that covers the middle on that side. You just have to kind of adapt to survive and figure these things out as you're playing games. And if you're a self-taught pickleball player, meaning you've had less than 20 private pickleball lessons in your life, I'm sure these tips are gonna be huge for you. But last week, we actually made a video specifically for self-taught players and the 5 biggest mistakes that you're probably making. So go check that out. Thanks for watching, guys.